Hey y'all, I'm here to talk about the first three stories from Raymond Carver's What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, Why Don't You Dance, Viewfinder, and Mr. Coffee and Mr. Fixit. And wow, what an interesting time to talk and think about love, particularly in the way that Carver depicts it. I'd like to think about these three stories for the purposes of this little talk in relation to what literary critic John Powell calls a sense of menace in Carver's short fiction. I hope that this not only helps you gain a new angle to see these stories, but also helps you develop a better sense of how you can use the writing of literary critics in your own writing and thinking about fiction. So, in his essay, The Stories of Raymond Carver, The Menace of Perpetual Uncertainty, I'll put the link somewhere where you can find it, critic John Powell says, quote, "The tracing of changes in Raymond Carver's short story style is one of the most persistent topics of Carver criticism. Unfortunately, by focusing on change, critics have overlooked one of the most consistent aspects of Carver's short stories, their sense of menace. In Fires, which is a collection that Carver wrote about his own writing, he explains, "I like it when there is some sense of menace in short stories. There has to be a tension, a sense that something is imminent." So I'd like for us to think and write to one another about what we think Powell, and by extension Carver himself, means by this idea of menace in our discussion panel this week. What does menace actually mean? How do the first three stories in What We Talk About When We Talk About Love convey it? I'm hoping here not to provide answers in the form of a lecture, but to provoke some thought and to ask some questions that will allow us to think differently about these stories and facilitate our discussion in the forum. Let's begin with Why Don't You Dance?, wherein we begin with the strange image of the total collapse of a relationship on display for all the neighbors to see. A house turned inside out, literally, so that all the intimate possessions are laid out in the front yard. Then we have a young couple and an older man drinking heavily while contemplating the destruction at hand. The young pair's relationship is strained already, or at least it's uneven. On page 5, you can read along, the girl says, "Kiss me," and the boy changes the subject, and then she starts a sentence, and she just never finishes it. It seems like there's some separation between them, maybe we as readers don't really know a whole lot about. And then by page 9, the girl seems to be developing a kind of closeness or an intimacy with the older man. The narrator tells us, quote, "He felt her breath on his neck," unquote. And the girl, speaking of the neighbors, says, quote, "Let them watch," unquote. It's as if the older man is giving her the intimacy the younger man can't handle for some reason, perhaps lack of maturity, but who knows. But at the end, we get a glimpse of what the girl is really thinking the whole time, and it's not flattering to the older man. Where's the sense of menace here? What is menacing about this? Is it the booze? The weird outdoor love triangle thing? Is it the man clearly giving up on everything? Just his sense of total abandon? Selling things for whatever price they want, etc. We'll think about that. Okay, now in Viewfinder, in the above-mentioned article by John Powell, Powell goes on about menace, explaining further, quote, "Throughout his career, Carver achieved a sense of menace by leaving out or providing only clues to crucial aspects of the story. Both character and reader sense that something dangerous or menacing is imminent or submerged, but both character and reader, unable to find the meaning of the given clues, must battle between readings of those clues. Menace develops as meaning itself becomes elusive," unquote. So that's a mouthful, but that's what Powell says about it. That menace develops as meaning itself becomes elusive. In other words, as we have to construct the meaning, the menace emerges, this sense of menace. Now, I think Viewfinder is a good example of this. The man without hands gives no explanation as to how or why his family took his hands from him, and we're left to just wonder about that. How exactly is that menacing, we might ask? Love, in a sense, particularly for these characters, destroys us, leaves us both mental anguish and physical disfigurement in its wake. Then there's also something menacing about having to imagine this guy handling a bulky Polaroid camera with 2 hooks. It's not something we want to really envision. If you all have never used a Polaroid camera, it might make less sense for you, but they are big, unruly, plus the photo develops on the spot and is supposed to be handled carefully. To imagine this man managing such a feat carries a sense of menace in itself. I'd like you to think or wonder about the symbolism in this story as well. What do the rocks, the hooks, the jello symbolize, if anything? Taken together, what symbolic picture do they sketch? And last, we have Mr. Coffee and Mr. Fixit. I guess in this story, the question is not quite whether this is menacing, but what is most menacing? We have an elderly mother who's part of a singles club, hooking up in front of her son. We have cheating all around. We have a lot of alcohol, resentment, pain, mourning. Think about how Carver just throws in a paragraph at the end about the protagonist's father dying, to contrast maybe with the new man the mother has found from the beginning of the story. It's pretty menacing, no? The rest of the stories in this collection also offer snapshots of broken relationships, lost connection, desperate people who turn to substance abuse. But what does it give us of nourishment? Is it all menace? Or is there anywhere that we're allowed to breathe and find refuge in one another? Well, I'll let you decide.